we are going to move into the next part, which maybe some of you have been avidly waiting for. I am actually avidly waiting for, even though I have some insight into what's been shared, but only as a lay person. So I am now delighted to introduce Professor John Baker, Councillor Dave Quinn, two long-standing members, esteemed members of Basic Income Ireland, but also probably other people with many hats and so on. I know that John is an emeritus professor for the UCD and set up the equality department there. Dave, I know, actually has a background in software engineering, which has actually been very handy for looking at the intricate details of how we would actually fund this basic income. And together they have devised the way to do it. And it actually sounds absolutely amazing, and we look forward to hearing more about it. So for what we'll do now is we'll hear Dave and John present that, and then we'll be able to go into a bit more engagement and discussion. So Dave and John, over to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much for coming to the launch of our paper, Model of Basic Income for Ireland. Our presentation just covers the highlights of our paper, which is already available on the Basic Income Ireland website. And most of what we'll say today is also summarized in the handouts that you've got before you on your chair. Now, our paper takes for granted that basic income is a worthwhile policy. And we summarize the case for basic income at the start of the paper. And there are a few lines in the handout about it. But there's nothing that we can say now that would be more elegant than what you've already heard. So move straight on to the guts of it, right? The object of our paper is to see how, if basic income were primarily funded by taxes on personal income, it could be done in a way that meets four key objectives. And those are the ones that are on the screen now. First of all, we aim for a more equal distribution of net income than what we've got at the moment, because we're egalitarians. But because of the nature of our exercise, we're only aiming in this model for a relatively more equal distribution of net income. Secondly, we want to have a system which has a progressive tax rate. Everybody's in favor of progressive tax, and the important thing is to understand what a progressive tax is. We're talking about effective tax, and as it says on the cover of your handout, we define effective tax as your total tax minus your basic income payment as a proportion of your market income. If you do that sum, then you can find that your effective tax could be negative. You get more from your basic income than you're paying tax, or it could be positive. And we want to make sure that the effective tax that a person faces increases as their market income increases. Then the third aim of our paper is that we want it to wash economically. So we want to have a relatively high basic income that's paid to all adults, that's economically feasible. And two key issues about economic feasibility is that it should be done in a way that leaves all the money that the state needs for all the other purposes that it wants to achieve. And secondly, we want to avoid tax rates that are widely considered to be too high. Some of us think that tax rates could be way higher for people on high incomes, but we don't want to frighten any horses here, so we're trying to keep the income tax rates within what is broadly considered to be acceptable. And then finally, we want to have a mechanism in our funding model which is clear and transparent, so that people can say, well, where's this basic income coming from? Basic income coming from? We say, yeah, this is where it's coming from. Now, it's widely assumed that a basic income at a relatively high level with a progressive tax structure can only be met at a prohibitive level of taxation. And even the SRI was saying that in their report quite recently. And by a schedule of tax rates that are low on the first band of income and rise as bands for higher bands of income. But we propose a different analysis of this. Now, by way of background, you need to know, and you probably do, that here in Ireland, the tax system on personal income has four components. Three of these are deductions from your market income, income tax, USC, and PRSI. And the fourth, employer PRSI, is paid by employers. And in our paper, we use that structure to set out our model in detail. And then we try to show that it works by validating it against the last normal year for which we have appropriate data, which is 2019. Obviously, COVID screwed things up. That would be useful. We don't have the data from 2022 to do that. So you have to bear in mind that all the figures that we use are from 2019, because that's the year that we used to validate our model. Now, to go into the model in a little bit more detail, here are the central elements of what we have to say. First of all, we set the basic income at a level to match existing core social protection rates. The maximum core social protection rate in 2019 was 203 euros a week, or about 10,600 euros a year. So that's the level of income that we use to validate our model, the level of basic income. Secondly, we maintain the existing income tax rates, 20% on lower bands, 40% on higher bands, and the most common employer PRSI rates, which is 0 for low incomes and 4% for everybody else. But we replace many key income tax credits, allowances, and exemptions with your basic income payment. Now, the center of our proposal is to replace USC with something we call Universal Basic Income Contribution. And that has higher rates than USC has at the moment. Precisely, in particular, if your income is below about 21,000 euros, it's at 20%. If your income is above 21,000 euros, it's 30% on your first 21,000 euros of income, 8% on the next 50,000, and 11% on incomes over 70,000. Now, so in our model, the first band of income is income up to twice the level of basic income, which is around 21,000 in 2019. And we identify UBIC as the primary, transparent, intelligible, central funding mechanism for basic income. And the rest of our model consists in a smallish increase in employer PRSI, 13% on low incomes, 15% on higher incomes, and to replace core social welfare payments and student maintenance grants with basic income payments. Now, under this way of looking at things, and with the specific rates we propose, a person with a market income of less than 2 times what they're getting in basic income will have effectively paid less than 40% of the value of their basic income back to the state through taxes, through their UBIC. And a person with a market income over 21,000 will have paid back through UBIC about 60% or more of their basic income, of the value of their basic income. And somebody with about 7 times the income of basic income will have paid back the full amount of their basic income. So you can see how basic income targets people on low incomes because it claws back the money from people on higher incomes. So the thing that's unusual about our model is this idea that UBIC has a higher rate for the first band of income than it has for higher bands of income. So what's the case for this? Isn't that regressive? Isn't that wrong? Well, we think no. First of all, one of the key things to note is that it's an effective approach to overall funding, to tax the first band of income at a higher rate. Because in general, for any rate of tax, the state receives more from a tax on the lower band of income than it receives from the same rate of tax on a higher band of income. So that's what brings in the money to fund basic income. But of course, that approach is only justified if it's consistent with the primary purpose of basic income, which are, of course, to give greater financial security and flexibility to everybody, and in particular to provide support for people with low precarious incomes. And that's why we apply a lower rate of UBIC on low incomes, while still recovering some of the total expenditure of basic income from their market incomes. And then for people with higher basic market incomes, the 30% rate helps to recover a greater proportion of basic income expenditure, while people still benefit from the security and the flexibility of a basic income system. And many people above 21,000 still benefit financially too, as Dave will elaborate on in a moment. The key point is that you take all these things and put them together into a single package, and you find that all of our 4 key objectives can be met by this system. And Dave is now going to show that by taking us through our 21-19 data and seeing what it does.
Thanks very much, John, and thanks hugely for the contributions earlier in the session. They were quite inspiring. Unfortunately, I'm the numbers guy, so glaze over if you wish, but these are the necessities that hopefully will facilitate the ambition that we have in terms of delivering a universal basic income in a way that's manageable and feasible. So I just want to first of all mention the key sources of data that we used when we were building our model. And as John has said, 2019 is the most recent year that's relevant in this regard. First, we use the CSO statistics, obviously, which gives us total numbers of adults in the country in 2019. For the purposes of this model, we're presuming that child benefit will stay in place as actually what it stands at the moment, which is a universal payment to all children under the age of 18. So we're dealing with adults. So when we do the sums in terms of the numbers of people in the country in 2019, and we allow for the €203 per week, as John has mentioned, with higher sums for people aged over 66, and higher sum again for those aged over 80. The sum total of all the basic income payments come to a large figure, which is €41 billion. And that does frighten some horses. But please, I ask you to bear with us. So in our model, we look at some key revenue statistics, because we want to apply a new set of personal tax rates on what we call market income. And in order to look for that within the revenue statistics, we find something that revenue called USC income. We also use something that they call individualized gross income distribution, which effectively tells us how many people are earning how much in what band of income. So we know how many people are earning up to 13,000, how many are earning between 13 and 14,000, how many are earning between 14 and 15, and so on, all the way up to 275,000 plus. So taking all this data together, we're able to recalculate the tax, income tax, PRSI, and UBIC based on our new model rates. Separately, Revenue also published its cost of expenditure report, which shows the cost of over 130 tax credit and allowance headings. And these help us to replace the standard tax credit costs with our own basic income costs. Finally, we use Department of Social Protection data provided by their statistics department, which lists over 80 specific headings of benefits. And each of them are listed and costed separately. And we've made our determination on which of those benefits would actually be either replaced in part or in full by our UBI payment. And in our estimation, there's 23 specific benefits that would be would be candidates for this partial or full replacement. And these are listed in our paper. So taking all this data and churning it through the calculations, this table shows what happens when we apply those rates. Not surprisingly, as John has already mentioned, our UBIC is making a very considerable contribution to the overall funding model. It's actually raising an additional 16 billion euro over the existing 4 billion in USC receipts. And now what that means is the full 20 billion euro in UBIC amounts to a recovery of almost 50% of our total UBI payments. This is crucial to our model. Income tax receipts will increase by over 7 billion euro due to the removal of the standard tax credits, which, as we say, are being replaced by the basic income payment. PRSI receipts will go up by nearly 4 billion euro due to the proposed increase in the employer contribution rates. And finally, going back to the social protection issue, we've monetized the 23 social protection supports that would be replaced or reduced by our basic income payment, and that amounts to 14 billion. Putting all that together, we submit that the 41 billion payout in UBI payments can be met in full with no change to the state's financial position. So, what does it mean for individuals? In our work, we've had to calculate the personal taxes for each band of income earner. So this allows us to generate this graph, which shows the net change in an individual's net income. All of the details behind this graph are in our paper, but just to illustrate, if we take an employee or an earner who was earning 20,000 in 2019, they would have received a net income in 2019, net of the taxes, of 18,600. But in our model, inclusive of the basic income payment, they would have received a total net income of 22,600. In other words, an increase of 4,000 euro. At the other end of the scale, if you've earned 70,000 in 2019, you'd have received a net income of just over 47,000 euro. In our model, you'd have received a total net income of 46,600. In other words, a reduction of just around 500 euro. This is our income redistribution at work. It's not significant, but it is noteworthy. The cutoff point between those net income earners whose net income would increase as opposed to decrease in our model is 55,000 euro, which means that in 2019, if you earned up to 55,000 in our model, your net income would have increased. If you earned over 55,000 euro, your net income would decrease. And just to put other numbers to this, sorry for the quantums, in terms of numbers of individuals, the number of people who earn up to and including 55,000 is in the region of 3 million out of the 3.5 million individual income earners, which means that our model is benefiting 6 out of 7 income earners. Okay, another graph. Again, our summary sheets show that the effective tax rate needs to be presented to people for further appreciation and understanding. John has already said that, and it's in the leaflet, that your effective tax rate is the sum of all your taxes less your basic income payment divided by your gross income. Here we graph the effective tax rates across the full range of income earners, ranging from 10,000 up to the high sum of 300,000. You'll see that those on incomes up to 21,000, they pay less in personal taxes than they receive in basic income. In other words, a negative effective tax rate. Beyond that level, the effective tax rate does increase, just like it does for all existing income earners. But remember that the model's effective tax rate is lower for all income earners below the level of 55,000. The tables in our paper also show that the change in effective tax rates, the difference between those income earners in 2019 and our model, for those earning between 55,000 and 150,000 is actually only less than 2%. So we're not talking about a very significant premium. The remaining individuals who earn over 150,000 would have their effective tax rate increased by just over 2%. But we do need to note that for those earning over 300,000, their effective tax rate would still remain below 50%. So, we've talked about effective tax rates. Now we're going to look at what we call marginal tax rates. And what a marginal tax rate is the rate of overall tax that any income earner would face on the increase of their income. So if you earn X and you earn X plus 1, what rate of tax is applied on that extra 1? What we're showing in this bar chart is we've divided income earners into 4 bands, from 0 up to 21,000, from 21,000 to 35,000, from 35 to 70,000, and then over 70,000. The model's marginal rates go up from 40%, which is made up of the 20% UBIC plus 20% income tax, down to 32% for the second income earner band, rising to 52%, and finally up to 55%. And remember that in 2019, the top marginal tax rate of 55% applied to non-PAYE income earners over 100,000. So we're not changing that significantly. But we also need to be aware of the fact that very high marginal rates are faced by people going from social welfare support into employment, and the potential loss of other benefits that they would face in moving into employment. This will certainly vary from one individual to another based on their circumstances, but some individuals face a marginal rate of over 60% when they lose benefits and tax exemptions. In our model, our marginal tax rates are considerably less. And again, I want to emphasize that despite the initial marginal rate of 40% for those earning below 21,000, they are still enjoying a negative effective tax rate. Now, finally, or not finally, but if my purpose is finally, I'm going to show you 2 sample payslips. And obviously this presumes that you're an employee of an employer. On the left-hand side, we're showing a payslip of what we call a median earner. In other words, in 2019, the median income, according to the CSO, was 37,000. 37,000 translates to just over 709 per week. And we show on the left-hand side standard deductions of tax, PRSI and USC, leading to a net pay of €577. On the right-hand side, we're showing the revised payslip under our model, which shows the 709 in salary, plus the tax-free payment, basic income payment of 203. And then we've got the deductions. The PAYE tax is higher because we don't have a tax credit. That's included in the basic income. PRSI employee is the same, but the UBIC is higher. It's replacing the USC, and it's increasing by 127. And that effectively is the core of the funding model. But overall, for this income earner of 37,000, it's showing a net increase of €12 per week, which just translates to about €630 per annum. So this income earner is well within the scope of the beneficiaries of the UBI model. So with that, I'm going to hand you back to John. He's going to wrap things up for us.
Thanks.
Yeah, so this is the kind of drive it. Right? We spent the first part of the morning talking about this fantastic, beautiful idea of basic income, all the things that it can, the ways it can benefit people, the added security to their lives, the added flexibility to their choices, and all that. And that's all what's driving this model. But then people say, hey, you can't do it. I mean, it's ridiculous, pie in the sky. And that's what we're in the business of doing. And so to bring you back to our objectives in this paper is just to say, have we met those objectives? Well, we have. There's a more equal distribution of net income. There's a better effective, a more progressive effective tax rate. There's a relatively high level of basic income. We'd like it to be higher, but for the moment, as a first step, to be able to match what core social welfare rates are is doing pretty well, and it's economically feasible. It doesn't have any significant impact on state finances. It avoids any scary levels of taxes for rich people. And finally, it has a transparent, acceptable funding mechanism, which is this idea the UBC is what you pay in order to fund basic income, and that keeps the whole system going. Now, nothing that we've said is an argument against using some other funding model or bringing in taxes from wealth taxes, site value taxes, VAT, whatever. Our intentions are much more modest and specific, which is to say, if you wanted to take the existing tax system without messing around trying to find sort of new sources of funding and so on, you can use the existing system, existing software systems that revenue already has in place, and bring in basic income more or less tomorrow in a way that is egalitarian, progressive, economically feasible, and politically acceptable. And if you like the sound of that, go to the website, download our paper, and read it in detail. Thank you very much.